episode or program. And one thing I'll say is that we'll be recording this, obviously. I think you saw the little prompt there. And this will be going on the library's YouTube channel. I think this is important because education is going to be real key to citizen and, small d democratic involvement in the development of this new Unified Development Ordinance in the city of Charlotte. And here today we are going to have not just Ismaail, but I can see in the list of participants we've got members from both the Community Benefits Coalition and the Housing Justice Coalition. We'll get to learn a little bit more about those two organizations and the role that they have played in the run-up to the Unified Development Ordinance and the 2040 plan. But for those of you who are just kind of coming in cold and kind of were just interested in this topic, maybe you saw something in the local media about the Unified Development Ordinance, or maybe you remember during the spring in particular, a lot of potentially, arguably heated commentary related to the approval of the Charlotte Futures 2040 plan. And so we've got Ismaail Qayim, who's a local attorney and activist who's involved with these organizations as well here, and also some other folks who are available to kind of give you an understanding of what this 2040 plan was, and of course, what this UDO is. So before we got into today's show, before we hit, I guess, play or record, I was talking with Ismaail about maybe we could start with pulling the lens back, particularly for everybody, just to kind of get an idea of what is Charlotte, what is the landscape of development, what's going on in our neighborhoods currently and historically, kind of set that context that leads us into 2040. Maybe we can explain that and then lead us into UDO, and we can maybe explain that. Would that be fair?
I think I can take a crack at it. I'll try my best.
Okay. And then you've got other folks in there, so if you feel like you got to hop in, please feel free to unmute yourself and chime in, because I think it's really important to put all of this activity into context, because the UDO didn't come out of nowhere. And so I think it'd be really important to kind of set the context before, almost kind of like a funnel. I'd like to kind of give the big picture and give, because the UDO is going to be a lot of paragraph Y, subchapter C kind of stuff. So maybe we can funnel it, and that'll help our audience to get a better understanding of really what we are dealing with here in the city of Charlotte.
Right. So to that end, I guess what I'll do is I'll just give a very basic overview of the UDO, what it is and what its function is going to be. And then I can talk a little bit about sort of my role and my involvement in terms of organizing, working with community members, neighborhoods, and really, what we really hope to get out of our, engagement and organizing around these issues of the broader issues that the UDO implicates. So with that being said, and there are other members of the coalition on here, so I encourage them to hop on whenever. But the Unified Development Ordinance, in a nutshell, basically what it's going to do is it's pretty much going to completely replace more or less most of the current zoning classifications in the city with a single kind of unified ordinance, right, as the name states. And the reason that matters or has implications is because if we understand, development, right, what's built where, all of that comes down to zoning. And so we know that Charlotte is a very, developer, like it's a city where there's a lot of capital pouring in, there's a lot of buildings, luxury apartments, things being built. And of course, from my perspective, our concern, of course, has been, gentrification and really, communities that have existed in Charlotte for a long time that haven't seen the benefits of this economic growth, really actually having a voice and having a say, in this development, right? So the Unified Development Ordinance is extremely important because it's pretty much going to set the new rules of the game, right? It's going to have legal force, and more importantly, it's going to give developers the ability to build what we call by right. And what that means is that as long as, as long as a developer builds something that is, that fits within the particular kind of like constraints, right, like of the Unified Development Ordinance, it's almost impossible, right, for that development to be, challenged or for that development to really be stopped, as long as it fits within those particular constraints that are laid out in the ordinance. So the current kind of the best example, the prototype for the UDO is really, are the transit-oriented development districts. So those are the districts, those are the development districts that you see along the light rail, right? So particularly like the Blue Line, when you see all of that construction, those luxury apartments, all of that is what we call by right development, basically meaning that, as long as it comports to the zoning regulations put forth in the UDO, developers more or less can build it. And there is a kind of optional kind of incentive for developers to build affordable housing. But, one of the constraints of being in North Carolina is that you can't use inclusionary zoning, which would, require a developer to build a certain percentage of affordable housing, particularly if they're receiving public funds. So with all that being said, right, it seems like a pretty bleak picture, right? When you look around and you see the history of Charlotte, particularly when you understand that, a lot of neighborhoods that are being impacted by gentrification are neighborhoods that are attractive to investors, because historically these neighborhoods haven't had the same level of investment, so the land is cheaper. Also, you have federal tax policy, the opportunity zones, which basically give crazy tax incentives, right, to basically revitalize a lot of, basically like lower to moderate income areas. If you can look at a map of where the opportunity zones are, and these were brought into effect by Trump's, tax plan. If you look at where they are, they tend to affect the most economically vulnerable parts of the city.
So Ismaail, so from the folks in the audience who kind of like are kind of newer to this idea of development, could you like maybe give the viewpoint of maybe somebody living in one of the neighborhoods currently, or maybe even historically, about how does, we're talking, we'll definitely drill into what by right means, but currently as it stands, if I'm a developer and I see a real, like you said, a lot of these neighborhoods were suffering from disinvestment for years, right? They've just, less storm, all of the housing is dilapidated, things are just not being taken care of. So it's cheaper land. But now, because of the economic development that's been happening in Charlotte, a huge amount of, like you said, capital is flowing in here. So take us through, like, currently, like, what the process is, like, if a developer, let's say it's part of West Charlotte and it's, there's been disinvested for some time. Maybe there's some people in the houses, maybe there's not, it's kind of, and the developer wants to go in there and maybe put up, I don't know, like a brewery or maybe one of those like mixed use commercial things where there's like, some residential on the top and some commercial on the bottom, kind of like Oreo cookie kind of thing. Talk about that perspective and how that has affected sort of like neighborhoods and neighborhood cohesion, because, a lot of times people will go away, right? They went to college and they come back and they knew what their neighborhood looked like. And now there's like an artisanal something sitting there where their house used to be, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. And I guess your question gets to the point, I think one of the challenges in really talking about this topic is that zoning is like very technical. And really it is a process that is really opaque and not accessible to people, but it has a lot of broad implications. So, what I'm going to try to do is just, talk a little bit about zoning and how it works currently. And then I kind of want to step back and talk about like sort of the bigger picture and really why there is a need to organize around these issues. So, say, for instance, you have the current zoning classifications, which are, there's like 60 or, but you have like some that are like more for residential areas, single family homes, some for like, there are already some kind of like detached like duplexes, triplexes. You have some that's industrial, commercial, whatever. But say, for instance, in a neighborhood, right, you have several parcels of land that traditionally were residential zoning. Okay. What may happen is that, like, if a developer is able to really acquire that land, and that can be done through maybe offering the people money, maybe particularly in historically Black neighborhoods where Black people haven't owned the homes, right? Where we're renting, the homes are owned by investors. So like maybe the investor sells to a developer buys them from several investors. And so what they'll have to do is they'll have to go through basically like a sort of a public process, like a conditional rezoning process, where they more or less have to There are certain requirements they have to meet. They have to have a community meeting. There has to be they have to basically petition the zoning commission and the planning commission, and
Ismail,
broadly about that.
before we jump into that, because you mentioned something about, and I kind of maybe might be helpful, is you mentioned that you've got a neighborhood and you've got folks living in these houses, and then developers somehow acquire it. Because I'll tell you, where I live, my father owns some properties, and I get letters all the time addressed to him, saying, "Hey, would you like cash, for your property?" Right? Maybe because I think that, it all kind of starts with the developer getting this property, usually with eyes of really, seeing this growth, but because it really kind of sounds like folks who are living here are not getting the value of, their investment, right? Because they live there, and then somehow, what have you seen? What are some of the ways these developers are getting hold of this sort of property?
Right. I mean, so effectively, what you have is that currently, basically, a developer would have to go through the city council. There's some kind of public process where people in the public can push back, right? But if you look at it, most of the zoning petitions that developers put forth, the city council approves because various reasons. And the neighborhoods, oftentimes where the petitions are not approved, tend to be the historically wealthier neighborhoods, in South Charlotte and in what we call the Wedge, Myers Park, Providence. But really at its core, what we really have is it's a process that's really being driven by the market, right? It's a function of capitalism. And so, what you have are basically historically disproportionately African-American neighborhoods, but also working class neighborhoods, whereby, for a long time, these neighborhoods are basically created as a result of kind of segregation, which is a mixture of public and actions by private actors in real estate and development in the 40s and 50s, and also public policy that basically entrenched African Americans into sort of less desirable neighborhoods.
That was urban renewal,
and that was done through through policy. And then of course we go through the age of urban renewal, where a lot of these neighborhoods were, they even despite the challenges, they became centers of commerce, community, culture, whatever. These neighborhoods are kind of basically uprooted and destroyed heavily with federal money, by local authorities right here in the city. And this happened all over the country. And so now you basically have a situation where what's left of these neighborhoods now are in a vulnerable position, because this is where, the capital is flowing in, and there is a desire by developers to acquire land, right, to build for profit. And so when you look at historically, I live in Clinton Park, that's where I grew up, it's in West Charlotte. When you look at, these neighborhoods, relatively speaking, the land is still cheaper. And there are also tax incentives to basically buy in these neighborhoods. And also that historically, the African-American neighborhoods in a lot of cities were in geographical proximity to the center of the city, where the business and the commerce, has always been. So not only do you have a combination of cheap land and federal policy tax incentives, but you also have the geographical proximity. And then to really top it all off, the local governance structures are not really using their regulatory capacity to really sort of redirect some of this public money that they're giving to developers to build into historically Black and working class, moderate income neighborhoods, right? They're actually using the regulatory power to actually make it easier for developers to buy and acquire land. So we kind of come in as community members, people that are interested in looking at, okay, well, why is Charlotte so unaffordable? Why is there a so-called housing crisis?
What you're saying here, because this is an important point, and you said it, is that currently it says in these disinvested communities, many of them majority communities of color, you're saying that that our government, our local government, is actually giving money to people to displace people. That's not good. That's
that's really, and it's not unique to Charlotte. I think Charlotte is cities like Charlotte and Atlanta are kind of, the damage is more pronounced for a myriad of different reasons. I think because of the inequality that existed before, because of the history of segregation. And also because like, unlike maybe states, in other parts of the country that have, say, rent regulation and other regulatory schemes like inclusionary zoning that can work to protect people, the southern states don't have that. So when you look at it, like I think Oxfam released a report basically listing like the top most unaffordable cities for someone that makes minimum wage in the US. The number one city was Atlanta, and I think Charlotte was number 4. It's
Yeah,
like the
no,
least
I mean,
affordable city for someone that makes minimum wage.
we're what, number 50 out of at least in that
Economic
study
mobility, yeah.
study of social mobility, and now we're number 4 in most expensive places to live. So now I think that maybe you in the audience you're starting to see kind of the real importance of this type of dialogue, that is not just about the X's and O's in paragraph subchapter C of something called a Uniform Development Ordinance, or what is in paragraph Y of the 2040 plan, is that we are in an environment where social mobility is somewhat still nil. I don't know. Now, Chetty hasn't put out his newest version of whatever, so maybe we got better, I hope. But then you got 50 out of 50 social mobility. You got number 4 in the country in most expensive places to live. That's not a good combination. And then when you've got folks who had housing, who could live in a house, and communities that had been kind of put in this area for a variety, like you said, with urban renewal and other market forces and non-market forces, moving things, that they stand to lose a lot of wealth, just in maybe possibly the short run or such. But then, because again, like you said, the land is cheaper, and now, but the thing is, like you mentioned about development, developers have to follow the rules, right? They can't just show up, buy the property, put up a hotel. They have to go through, like you were mentioning, this regulatory process. And I think this is a great area to kind of see where the idea of a community benefits coalition and where the housing justice issues are, is that there still is some democracy left, at least to some level, in the idea of land use decisions and what the nature of how we look and how our equity, that how we situate ourselves. And so yeah, I think that's good to kind of get that background, and as we move into the UDO. But for those of you, because I know a lot of people heard about that 2040 plan, maybe you could do a quick recap of what the 2040 plan was, and why it was such a hot topic, and how it leads into this UDO. And so I think that'll help some folks understand the thing.
Right. So I think my perspective on the 2040 plan may be a little bit different than kind of what I think has maybe been in the mainstream coverage. In a lot of ways, I look at the 2040 plan as fundamentally a referendum on where Charlotte is, where Charlotte has been, and where Charlotte really wants to go. And I think when you look at the debates around the 2040 plan, particularly the public hearings, you really see that like Charlotte is not really like a unified city. Like it's a bunch of people that live in the same place, but have vastly different experiences, right? Heavily based on, again, like economic access, educational opportunity, right? This heavily implicates, obviously, like socioeconomics, race, all of these factors. So, the 2040 plan, I think it was important, I think, from an advocacy standpoint, because it was putting forth the vision for what Charlotte was going to be, but it also was going to provide policy guidance for, how all of these decisions were going to be made, not in 2040, but like right now, right? Like it was, so, basically our thinking was, okay, if there's this document that's going to have policy guidance, what we want to do is we want to try to bring neighborhoods, community members, particularly people and communities that haven't had a voice, and basically insert ourselves and our voices directly into the 2040 plan to actually carve out a space, for communities, particularly, and ensure that there are at least there's a commitment to utilizing tools, for economic justice, economic access, and equitable development. The primary tool being the use community benefits agreements, right? Which are, agreements between developers and communities, wherein a developer more or less agrees to kind of, build or give concessions or give some form of investment or something like that to a community in exchange for the community not opposing the development, right? And so this is a tool that's used all over the country in different places. And when you look at the rezoning process, like you said, Rocky, earlier, the process, currently now, the process basically involves developers going into certain communities and basically negotiating, and they realize that they're going to have to give something in order to be able to get the community's buy-in to the project. The problem is that when this happens, this usually happens in places like South Park, or this happens in places like Myers Park, or this happens in certain parts of the city. And in like other parts of the city, right, up until recently, you know what I mean? Like developers, they're like, the community may not be engaged at all. And not only that, we've seen personally, and I can talk a little bit about sort of like, my advocacy and that of others, in Housing Justice Coalition. But one of the things we did was we became involved. We were supporting the Howie Acres community in addressing a rezoning in their neighborhood, right? And what we saw was that developers oftentimes didn't abide by the actual sort of regulatory procedures that were put in place, leading up to a public hearing where the city council would have to decide on the particular rezoning petition.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about Howie Acres. Like what because I've been to Howie Acres, but where is it and how does it kind of compare to like the neighborhoods we're talking about? Like, is it sort of an example of these sort of disinvested, kind of give us a little flavor of this and how this developer, I really want people to kind of see, how this happens in real time, because I think that will help kind of bring the, kind of bring the understanding a little bit more when they can see it kind of in practice, sort of how development is going and how communities can either choose to respond or not respond.
Right. So, I mean, Howie Acres is a community in sort of like Northeast Charlotte, like, sort of like Sugar Creek, North Tryon, like composed of like a few streets like Bearwood, Dinglewood, Howie Circle, in that part of Charlotte. And basically, they had, there was a developer that owned several parcels of land because of its location. And the developer wanted to rezone the parcels so that they could build the bigger homes, like the kind of McMansion homes that you see in like Belmont and Noda, right? And like further in North Charlotte. And so the community, rightly so, was concerned that number one, these homes would be out of touch with the character of the neighborhood, but more so they're concerned about their property taxes being raised, right? And you have a lot of, even in the neighborhood where people own their property, you have a lot of people on fixed incomes that are elderly. You have, combined with people that are renting, combined with like people that are, working class to moderate income. So the community was concerned about that, and they really didn't know how to navigate the process. They were reaching out to different people who were involved in different things. And they reached out to somebody in the Clanton Park Neighborhood Association, and that's how I got involved. And at the time, I still am, I was with the Housing Justice Coalition, and we were interested in, supporting neighborhoods. We were doing some organizing around evictions, working with tenants, anything related to housing, because we believe housing is a human right, meaning everybody should have access to it, regardless of their ability to pay for it. So we wanted to we were looking for for people to support. And so they reached out, and basically what we found was that, this particular developer had not followed the actual sort of regulatory zoning procedures. And we started out, working with the community, writing letters to city council saying, hey, they didn't provide notice of this development. They didn't have a community engagement meeting where they were supposed to actually talk to people. They didn't notify everybody within, whatever the radius is of where this actual project was supposed to happen. And it basically just escalated from there. We began to like I said, write letters to the city council. We began to like have, help work with the community to have like, to create like a media campaign around it. And ultimately we invited the representative Larkin Eagleston to a community meeting. And we got like 40 residents from the neighborhood to come out, like 35, 40 residents. And everybody just voiced their concerns directly. It was like, listen, we don't want this in our neighborhood, you know what I mean? Because we don't want to be priced out and we're not going to be kicked out. And, Howie Acres is in proximity to Noda and Belmont and all these other neighborhoods in North Charlotte, where, like these were once neighborhoods where a lot of African-Americans lived, maybe didn't own as much, but still lived.
It's kind of near like where now, there's a light rail station, right? Isn't it? Kind of like
there's a light rail station on Sugar Creek right across.
Yeah. So that would be like if you were wanting a McMansion and access to Center City, you could, it'd be pretty convenient for you to have a nice big house there in Howie Acres, and then just, I guess, maybe they'll have to put a tunnel or something, or I don't think you can just run across the street to, I wouldn't try to cross the street of Sugar Creek. But,
Yeah.
maybe like
But it's,
Frogger or something like that,
but it's a lot of
But
factors, right? It's
yeah.
proximity, it's proximity to the light rail, it's proximity to NODA. And
Mm-hmm.
so what we found was that actually the developer wasn't following all of the rules of the
Mm-hmm.
process. And we noticed that, like, listen, like, we're basically like, we're going to come out and oppose it, right? And we asked the city to push the public hearing back. And, effectively at the end of the day, the developer pulled out, right? They basically withdrew their petition to rezone these plots of land. They still own the land, but they can't build those like big houses in the neighborhood. And this is one of the first instances where like a, working class, historically African-American community has been able to win against a developer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think this was really the starting point where we, in terms of the Housing Justice Coalition, we began to kind of see the importance of, working with communities, but also, understanding, linking the broader political and economic and historical trends that we talked about earlier with the kind of like local regulatory schemes and policy that really drives development and really drives gentrification. And really, I would say just the displacement of Black neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're trying to like link these two things together. And we really, I think we kind of understood that, like, this is something that we can really organize around and really, I think, try to push for. And I think just from there, organically, as this talk of the 2040 plan happened, we began to say, okay, well, we need to kind of, how can we kind of like get involved in this, and how can we kind of like organize around this in a way that's going to give more voice, not give more voice, but I think create a fundamentally different paradigm in Charlotte, whereby it's communities operating from a standpoint of self-determination and really, being able to assert themselves, right, in this process and actually, like have a say. Like I don't see myself as an expert or somebody that's here to try to dictate what people should do, right? Like, I mean, I live in West Charlotte, and I view all of us as like neighbors and community members, like working together, fighting for our survival, like in tandem with each other, learning from one another. And so that was from the Housing Justice Coalition, the Community Benefits Coalition. There were kind of like some folks that had been in the West Boulevard corridor where I happen to live, who had seen, who basically had been burned over and over again by broken promises from the city, seeing developers being allowed to sort of build, not trying to figure out how to oppose it. And even when there was opposition to it, really that opposition not being taken seriously, say maybe by the city council. And so there was really a natural, organic kind of convergence of people who had all really been burned by this process, who had seen the need for neighborhoods across the city to really come together and organize. Number one, to kind of ensure that we were able to have some sort of input into the 2040 plan, because we didn't support it we didn't support it initially. I think our initial position was we liked the idea, the spirit of the plan, but unless there was more concrete language that was going to basically create a basis for us to have tools for communities to have more of a say in development, we were going to oppose it. And so we, through our organizing and through our, pressure and, we basically were, the Community Benefits Coalition was sort of born, and we basically were able to kind of assert some really, really good language in the plan and actually be recognized as a key stakeholder.
Talk a little bit about the Community Benefits Coalition, because I think that, there's some members here from it, but there's a lot of folks who might be sort of new to obviously the discussion, but tell us a little bit about what the Community Benefits Coalition, what is it?
Right. So the Community Benefits Coalition is a coalition of neighborhoods, nonprofits, organizations, individuals that really are committed to equitable development in Charlotte, uplifting, all of basically the struggles of those who haven't had a voice historically.
When you say equitable development, like give us some examples of what are some of what's the platform of the Community Benefits Coalition?
Right. And so, practically what that means is that, we're promoting the usage of community benefits agreements as a tool for communities to have a direct say in development. Basically, for communities to be able to like enter it, to be number one, brought into the process when there is development, particularly that will impact people economically, right? Like either in their neighborhood or a large scale development project that has a large amount of public investment, like, you know, millions and millions of dollars, right? You know, our philosophy is that if we're kind of giving this money to a private actor to really build for their own profit, that has to there has to be, that private actor has to reinvest into like neighborhoods and communities that will be impacted by that development, but also like, you know, to the public at large. So we really, you know, and we can talk about specific examples of kind of how this looks, but, you know, effectively when I talk about Howie Acres, right?
Yeah.
Like that's an example of a community being able to like mobilize and organize, you know, and in this case, it was opposing something, but in other cases it may be, well, maybe we can, you know, kind of, you know, instead of opposing it outright, we can kind of have a sit down with the developer who wants to build and say, listen, you know, we live here too. We want these amenities. We don't want to be kind of stuck and sequestered to like food deserts, and, you know, not having the infrastructure that we need. You know, will you invest in XYZ? Will you build XYZ, right? Or will you, as a part of your project, will you include, you know, if it's a larger scale project, a community center? Will you include these types of things?
It's a negotiation, right? Because like when you said Howie Acres, you've got a developer, they own a lot of land. They see them, they know the north line is running all the way to UNC Charlotte. You got a hot you know, stop right there on Sugar Creek. I mean, obviously they're going to have to build something. No one's walking across Sugar Creek to go to this light rail, you know. But nonetheless, you know, it's still prime. You're right outside of NODA, right? NODA's hot as sin, right? You know, I mean, you just when you get to Sugar Creek and then boom, you're in Howie Acres. I mean, it's sort of like adjunct to NODA in some respect. But what you're saying is that it, as a tool of equitable development, had the developer or possibly the developer could return and could propose to that community and say, I'd really like to build something here with this land that I own. But I understand that you could oppose me. And when we talk about opposing, it's not just out, you know, just like I don't agree, is that because there's still some level of democracy as far as land use decisions, there still has to be a vote. And I think this is going to play into that as a right by developer discussion. We're going to talk about BDO, is that at least currently that developer, if they want to have something built there that's not in its use, right? So if it's one bed, you know, whatever, single family residential, and I want to put up, you know, a loft hotel, you know, right there, I got to get the land use change. I can't just willy-nilly build that. I have to go through the process. And it is through that you would go to the city, you go to planning and zoning, you go to the city, and you'd have to have them vote on whether you could put a loft hotel right there in the middle of Howie Acres. But of course, if a lot of voters, people who live there, and of course, if you have a coalition, right, you've got neighborhoods and neighbors and friends from other places in the community that show up at said council meeting, it's a lot more difficult for that developer to say, I want a loft, and then there's like 100 people are going like, you're going to destroy our neighbor. You know, there has to be some give and take. And so when we talk about these community benefit agreements, you know, historically it has been that the developer, and it's kind of like the reverse of economic development incentives where counties and government give out all kinds of money, you move here. This is where the developer actually puts money and investment into the place. So build a school, build a park, you know, I don't know, hire locally, those kind of things. They put the investment into that neighborhood in order to build there. So it's an interesting, I think in some respects, the philosophy of the community benefit agreements are very different than the economic development incentive that governments are always giving out to people. Move your Amazon plant here, move Chewy, move Chiquita banana here, we'll give you this. This is, if you want to move here because it's hot, because we're, you know, you want to redevelop here, you got to give us X, Y, and Z. And then because in contract law we call this consideration. Consideration is we won't blow up your stuff at the city council meeting. And I think that plays into this notion of as a right, because if a developer can build a loft as a right, there's no sort of leverage.
Yeah, they don't have to go through that same public facing process. Yeah. I mean, but, you know, really at its core, you know, I mean, there was this whole debate over single family zoning versus the loss of it. We didn't really take a super strong position on it either way. And the reason for that is because, the gentrification that we see and really the displacement that we see is being driven by, again, market forces, right? And it's happening rapidly now, even with these things in place, it's happening rapidly now. Like, I think Howie Acres is such a special story because it doesn't happen typically.
It's
and
sort of the
and also
unicorn story in the history of urban development.
well, and also too, I mean, even in the Howie Acres case, one of the things that we did along with the folks in Howie Acres who were, I mean, I have to give it to, Miss Vicky, Miss Roma Johnson Durham, just the neighborhood leaders, the community, really strong people. But,
Yeah.
We reached out to a lot of other adjacent neighborhoods and a lot of other neighborhood associations throughout the city. And we basically added them as signatories to our letters to the city council. So this is really about leveraging the collective power of people, right, to kind of do exactly what you're saying. I mean, instead of this really top-down process where the city bends over backwards to the county and gives all these incentives to developers, not only that, is really lax when developers don't follow the regulations.
And the developers organized, right? They have
what's
it called, REBIC, or is that, or something?
Right.
Is that their associate? They have a club.
Well, that's the thing when we talk about, unions, which is still, for some people, is a dirty word. It's like,
or an association,
like your landlord has one, developers have one. They have their own organizations that really advocate and push for favorable policies. They give campaign contributions.
Full-blown lobbyists, I mean, they're like there's the apartment association. You've got the REBIC. I mean, they understand it. They understand the levers of power, right? Because if you organize enough people who represent certain blocks, these legislators will be, oh, well, I need to listen to you, because you're not just Howie Acre. You're just not just one person. You represent a whole association of various businesses and industries and things of that nature. But the neighborhood side has never really had that type of, well, maybe they have from time to time, but that those legislators, those city council people in particular, who should be somewhat sensitive to the grassroots, because maybe they grew up there, for one thing. But when you mentioned the Community Benefits Coalition, you said there's 30 plus neighborhoods. You think of a neighborhood and you think of that, I think of that T-shirt or that poster of all the neighborhoods in Charlotte. You might see it in some of these curio shops or something like that. It's there's Darrata and there's Enderley Park, but then there's Winterfield or something. They're all kind of pointed out. If you imagine all these neighborhoods kind of coalesced into sort of an organized structure that could then put forth its own platform. So the city council is hearing all it has from the apartment association about development, the REBIC about the association, but here you've got a sort of a grassroots federation of neighborhoods and other sort of allied organizations, like maybe a labor union or maybe just a faith-based organization or just a regular community-based organization, like an after-school program that just cares about these sort of things. And I think what I have seen just from my observations and why it's always an important development in this year, really, you really think about it, because they were talking about 2040 plan even a year ago. And we actually kind of talked about it on this program, is that in this year, this organic coalescing of these neighborhoods into this community benefits coalition, I think has changed the power dynamics of discussions of development, that there is another voice and another vision of how development, or at least accountability. Maybe that might be a word there. It's if not totally involved, at least a watchdog that is at least there to kind of keep actors honest. And I think that's an important development in the city of Charlotte. And I think that's I think that's one of the most appreciated, there are a lot of underappreciated things in the city of Charlotte. We talk about them even in the art space, then there are last few episodes about underappreciated, activities and things. But, this no pun intended, this development of sort of an organization related to development is an underappreciated, milestone in many respects.
It's like you said, it's an organic, natural coalescing and of different people and that have seen this play out. But, this is just the start, I mean? We're really kind of in in the weeds because there's the UDO stuff, there's the policy mapping stuff, and now the city council is also having the conversations around redistricting. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of stuff moving at the top.
But tell us, kind of break down kind of these issues. Because you mentioned kind of some distinct things. Because now because obviously the 2040 plan, it got beat up on, but then it eventually, it got approved by council, and so that sets the stage. But you mentioned a couple of things. Obviously, you said there's like an ordinance advisory committee, an equitable development committee, and these are activities or discussions, committees of folks that now we're seeing CBC individuals being involved in, where prior to they were shut out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right, and well, I think at its core, what you really see is, like you said, a natural coalition kind of coming together. And it's really just the start. And I mean, I know I think we have big aspirations, and I think that I would like to think that, we've maybe provided an alternative way that maybe, invigorates people and I think lets people know that things don't have to be the way they are. But with all that being said, we have our work cut out for us. So with that being, I think the first thing, of course, is, like you mentioned, we talked about the Unified Development Ordinance. There is an ordinance advisory committee that basically has, for 5 years, the Unified Development Ordinance was in the works before the actual comprehensive plan was. So, it's been, for basically a long time, this committee has existed, which has overseen the drafting of the Unified Development Ordinance before it was released publicly recently. And one of the things that we did, the Community Benefits Coalition, when we got involved, is one of our demands was like, listen, you need to have more community representation on the Ordinance Advisory Committee. That was one of the things that we pushed for. And, and we got it.
Well, who's on the ordinance? I mean, you don't have to say names, but like what sort of sectors or
right? Well, it's heavily representative. Of course, there's heavy representation from those in the development sector, building firms, law firms that represent, real estate developers. There was some community representation from a few select neighborhoods. There was a decent amount from like the South Charlotte neighborhoods, of course, but it was lacking in terms of representation in East Charlotte and West Charlotte, and really just, a diverse group of people. So, we got, folks from our coalition on there. So that's one thing. And the draft of the UDO is out. And I'll talk, I guess maybe the last thing, I'll talk a little bit about our sort of strategy and approach to the UDO as a coalition. What we basically want to do is we realize that it's going to give more power to developers to build because there won't be a rezoning process. So we need to basically have some changes put into the actual regulatory structure to really protect communities and give communities more leverage, because at the end of the day, we're going to lose whatever little bit of like political leverage we have. And this would have happened regardless of the 2040 plan, because
the
UDO is separate from that.
So Ismaail, under this new rubric and this new idea of this UDO, there's a higher probability that developer went into Howie Acres could build what they wanted as a right, or is that
right? Well, it would have. So that's the thing. I mean, it also would have depended on what the developer wanted to build. In this case, the developer actually wanted to build a single family home, just like one that was like, in terms of the dimensions, was much bigger. So that's, again, why this whole debate over single family versus multifamily zoning, while it's important, I think it kind of maybe misses like the fundamental things that are causing the gentrification and the change, right? Which again is, it's the power of developers that they have in the city, and it's, the market forces. And basically we kind of have to organize and step up and really push the city to really use its regulatory power to protect and directly invest in the communities. And that's not just the kind of direct engagement, right, or sometimes confrontation with developers, but also that means like, listen, if the city council or the board of county commissioners is giving away, is selling publicly owned land, right, to a private entity, then there needs to be something, right, that's there that actually benefits, people or communities, right? So it's not just private actors, but we see a lot of this in the public sector, where the public sector is either selling off land or is giving out large incentives of public dollars, and also, their programs that the city funds, right? Like these programs could be, better funded, could be revamped. So there's a lot to really push for. But I mean, we see that with the Unified Development Ordinance, it's just going to have a tremendous impact on development and on communities. And it's potentially will increase the rate of gentrification, right? In addition to what's already happening, because it's going to give developers more power to build without having to go through any regulatory process. So if that's the case, then we have to organize and come together to really, shape the policy and actually shape the UDO itself in order to be able to like get something in there that at least protects what communities already exist and also requires, some kind of reinvestment into these communities, right, by developers. That's the broad sort of idea. And I mentioned the thing called policy maps or place types. That's kind of, if you think about it, if you think of the UDO as sort of a broad umbrella, right, like of regulations that is blanketed across the city, right, it's sort of like, I guess maybe like the layer that's underneath that is like the policy maps, right? The policy maps basically lay out like, basically like what kind of thing can be built where. So for instance, you'll have like a designation of neighborhood 1, right? Or neighborhood 2, whereby like maybe in neighborhood 1, it's mostly detached single family homes, right? And then you might have like, you have like 10 categorizations within the policy maps. And basically right now, what the city is doing is the policy maps are kind of available for public input. And what you can do, I encourage everybody to do this, is, hopefully I can actually ask if somebody can put the link to the policy maps in the chat, but go on there and type in your zip code, type in your address and see how it's mapped. And the map is going to show you the particular classification, right, for your neighborhood. And basically, like if that's adopted, right, if you have a classification that's where it's more so for commercial or industrial development, and it's over part of your neighborhood, what that means is that if a developer owns property or an investor owns property in your neighborhood with, say, an industrial classification, right, like they can build something that's like industrial or commercial inside your neighborhood.
No matter what, right? You say.
So, and you can't, you know what I mean? It's like you won't have the ability to kind of like challenge it in the same way. And as long as basically like it fits within the particular designation, right, like it'll be very difficult to really challenge.
Yeah, because like even if you got 100 people to show up at a city council and protested it, the developer could say, I have a right because it's in the law, and it would be illegal for you to not let me build here because it's in the ordinance, right? It's as of right? Development by right. I have a right, a right trumps a lot of things, right?
Right. And so think of the ordinance as like I said, as sort of a broad umbrella of zoning regulation. And like what we might be able to do is put certain kind of tools within there that could be put over certain neighborhoods as a means of preservation. There's some of that has already been preserved and something like that is in the current draft, but we want to see a stronger version of that actually requires more to be done. But the policy maps are so important because the maps are really going to kind of color the maps are going to like determine like what is actually allowed to be built where, right? Like the maps are going to correspond kind of to the UDO. And part of the difficulty in explaining all of this is that this process is all happening in real time right now. So the time for people to be engaged and the time for people to like, give their input into all of this is right now. So please look up the policy map, type in your zip code and look at the designations there and see how your neighborhood is designated in the current draft of the policy map. And the city's going to, I think the current period closes in early November, but there's going to be another round of public input, and the UDO and the policy map won't be adopted until next year. So, our thing is, a big part of this is not just, beating the drums and sort of raising our voices, but it's also educating ourselves and trying to get the word out to members, to community members and to everybody else about all this stuff, because, we can talk about the broader, again, political, historical dynamics, and it's not only that's important, people have to understand that, but then when you look at the actual application of it, in this particular instance, the application of it becomes a lot more technical because the city is kind of like being reshuffled, like the zoning regulations are being changed, there are new maps that are being introduced. And on top of that, recently, the city council, the school board, and the county commissioners are all like redrawing their political districts. So it's like there's a whole lot of shuffling happening right now. It's going to have really serious implications really, really soon. So that's why it's important to really kind of.
So, Ismaail, I know that there's like 600 page, at least that's what I saw in the newspaper. It said 600 page. That's a lot of pages.
Yeah, we've got a physical copy in our branch, and it's
Okay.
it's overwhelming.
Well,
just looking at
you know what? For those of you, go to your local branch if you want to, because that's a lot to print out.
I mean, you can.
60 pages is a lot to print out. Most people print 600.
You can obviously do the entire thing online, but just putting yourself, I mean, just being the average citizen and looking at this thing, it's pretty overwhelming to parse out. So I guess, just focusing on what to give feedback about. If you've not, I will say the language is pretty clear and concise. It's just, there's just a lot of content.
Right. And I think we're going to be doing community engagement around the UDO and sort of, we had a town hall recently, and, we're going to continue to do that kind of engagement. And not only that, we're going to put forth our own kind of policy demands.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Right. Because that's what we've done up until now. We kind of did
the
2040 plan. We had like press releases. And so we're going to continue to do that. And so we want to, really be a resource that, folks out in the community can come to and ask questions. And, we're kind of going through it ourselves, and we're going to, designate what the key provisions are of the UDO that I think are going to be the most directly impactful to the conversation we're having around, the historic issues of inequality and, segregation all the way up to gentrification and equitable development.
Ismaail, I know, like I said, it's 600 pages, but I know that you and your team have had at least a couple of changes, probably a flip through it. And just on first blush, is there anything that kind of catches the coalition's eyes? I mean, 600 pages is a lot, but at least from your first blush, are there things that sort of, I don't call them red flags, or any concerns that you may see from your perspective?
Right. So, there are a couple of interesting things I would point people to look at. One is the Conservation Overlay District within the Unified Development Ordinance. The Conservation Overlay District is a proposed district that can be kind of like almost like superimposed in different geographies that basically would, I think, currently restrict like the size of what could be built where and setbacks. So that's potentially one tool. I would also look at the neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2 classifications as well. And what else? I would look at within those. I would also look at the bonus structures because within those classes, the UDO is basically kind of, like I said, it's heavily based on the transit-oriented development districts, right? That were along the light rail. And so when you look at some of those, you see there are patterns in terms of like how it's been sort of written out and built out. So, the bonus structure is supposed to basically provide incentives for developers who maybe choose to build affordable housing. But it's very rarely used. And so that's why we were saying that, the bonus structure as it stands currently is not going to be strong enough. It's not going to have enough teeth to really kind of, I think, get the types of things we want. Those are some things, kind of like right off the bat. Like I said, we're still going through it. So I mean, this is the first draft of it. I think there's going to be.
Revik is probably still trying to get through it themselves, probably. I mean, that's a massive document. Well, we are right now close to the end of the hour, but that doesn't mean, but I think this would be a great time to kind of, I know we want to make it more interactive, but I know we got a lot of folks here who've got a lot of experience in this struggle, in this work, some perspectives and such. So feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourselves and either comment on what we've been talking about, maybe add something. Have you got a question? Please, this is the audience participation time. So
I was also just going to say before we do that, the two groups that I'm working with, the Housing Justice Coalition and the Community Benefits Coalition, hopefully somebody can drop the information in the chat if people are interested and kind of want to join our listservs or check us out on IG or Facebook or whatever else. But yeah, I just wanted to throw it out there.
Oh, I see somebody wants your contact info as well.
Sure.
Ismaail, if you can put that in the chat. Mr. Aaron Sanders would like because and I think that's a real important thing is that is that if you believe in kind of if you believe in the vision of what the Community Benefits Coalition and the Housing Justice Coalition are putting forth, their particular model needs people. It needs, it needs heft. It needs, the more signatories, the more, particularly voters, that would be good too, but the more folks that they can then go to that table. Because right now it sounds like what's going on is a little bit like when you watch like the news and it says, well, there's a reconciliation bill and they're going back and forth and there's this, they got 3 trillion. Now that's like, this guy doesn't want to do something. So now they want it 1.8, it sounds like we're kind of, lightly in some respects, we're in a position where your representatives in many respects, and in some respects, almost you and some of the folks in CBC are almost like your Congress people inside of this process here. And those of and so get involved, I think is a great is a great thing. And again, the more people that are in this coalition, more neighborhoods, the more and again, those who vote, those who are involved, that's more leverage that goes to that negotiating table, because ultimately city council is going to have to pass this, or going to, and they do have a lot of sway with staff, and staff, even though the staff aren't subject to election, the council is. And so, I think that they will be a little more sensitive if there are, if it's just, a couple of neighborhoods, yeah, they might be, but if there's 30, if there's 60, you pretty much have like, a real strong, coalition that provides you sort of that leverage to, get your agenda, more of your agenda in than, well, the other group's agenda, because there's another group that we're not talking about, but they have an agenda too. All right, please, Chief, jump in. I know Christy will. She always does stuff.
I think Christy had to come up to the desk.
Oh,
I was also going to say too, there are a couple of other members of the Community Benefits Coalition here. I don't know if they wanted to speak or not, but I'll
please. I know that I see some names there. I know more than I do, so please speak.
Yeah, this is good morning, everybody. This is Kyle Pierce from Enlivian. Everybody in the housing and homelessness space is kind of dealing with a lot. So I wanted to thank Ismaail for being such a great resource through all the organizations he works for. That's kind of how we've been following it, is through kind of your guidance. So we really appreciate it. We do have 45 communities across the city of Charlotte, each one with their kind of own kind of property, kind of resident organization with a residents advisory council. How do you think the Community Benefits Coalition, or would you suggest anything to kind of connect those resident organizations at the property level and resident advisory council with the great work that you all do? Because I know they want to be involved.
Right. I mean, I think it's, it's the same process really for like anyone who wants to really be involved. And, I think, take advantage of what we're putting out and really, join our coalition. I mean, they can just reach out, directly. We can, sit down and have conversations about kind of, what's going on and where, how we can kind of like, mutually support each other. And, I think like the Residents Advisory Council, I think within like Enlivian is definitely like tasked with representing people who live in subsidized housing. So, I mean, there's definitely, I think, a role in an organization like the CBC for the Resident Advisory Council.
That's awesome. Appreciate that. And do you have any like published materials that I can bring forward to them and have a kind of introductory conversation about, and then follow up?
Why don't you shoot
there?
me an email? And so what
Okay.
I think the best thing probably would be like some of our press releases. We also did a memo on community benefits agreements and their legality, because one of the initial pieces of pushback that we got from sort of REBIC and certain people in the development community is that CBAs are illegal in North Carolina, and we really pushed on that point to really kind of kill that talking point. So if you you can shoot me an email. You can also shoot the Community Benefits Coalition email is there as well as HJC email. We can just set up a time to talk.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. And again, I appreciate your work.
Yeah, for sure.
I know we got to have more people that have things to share. I see Dr. Sylvia. I know Jimmy. I know Jimmy's like one of the smartest people I've seen talking about the, I mean, if you wanted to, he's with the Housing Justice Coalition, but I learned so much from that Housing Justice Coalition newsletter that he puts out. I mean, that's one that I print out and I read when it comes out. I mean, Jimmy, kudos. You do a lot. He writes up things on housing issues and just books to read and things that are going on in council. I think that you inspired QC Nerve to start writing about city council because all of a sudden I think we said that was great, and all of a sudden now QC Nerve like giving a play by blow with the city council now. So Jimmy's at work. Well, that's because that's the thing is like this is a group of folks who work and that are doing this because they believe in it and they're and so it's important stuff. And I see Dr. Sylvia. I know she's been at this work for so long, and again, like I've been public to say, I think she Dr. Sylvia knows more about land use law in the city of Charlotte than most land use lawyers in Charlotte.
Hey, Rocky, how y'all doing? Thanks so much for this. This has been great. Ismaail, maybe you can also just talk about the overlay right now of the policy place types maps that are going on at the same time, because it is so important for people to understand that there are really three components, one being the Comp 2040, which has already been adopted, but just equally important, as Ismaail has just said, UDO, Unified Development Ordinance, which really is just going to take all of the development ordinances. It really benefits developers because it takes all of the development ordinances and it unifies those ordinances into one unified development. So whether you're talking about setbacks, you're talking about streetscape, you're talking about stormwater, you're talking about the tree ordinance. I mean, there are like 8 ordinances that developers really had to adhere to. Now this UDO has unified those ordinances into one document, if you will. But Ismaail, equally talk somewhat about the policy place types that individuals should be focused on as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I just want to reiterate that, like we said, if you think about the UDO as a large kind of like umbrella that sets sort of the rules of engagement, right, for what can be built where, the place types are going to actually kind of like determine, like, I guess, like, are going to actually kind of lay out the landscape of like what can be built, right, according to, again, these particular designations. So like neighborhood 1, neighborhood 2, and basically what that's going to mean is that because you no longer have the rezoning process whereby you can kind of go through a regulatory process to challenge certain developments, the place types are more or less going to determine, like, going to set, okay, this is like a residential area. This is like a sort of a mixed income, mixed use area. This is like a commercial area. This is like an industrial area. And these maps have to be adopted by city council. And so, like I said, it's really important. Number one, there's a bunch of different engagement sessions that are going on across the city. Please go to one of those engagement sessions. If you want more information, reach out to us directly. Number two, Jimmy put the link in the chat. You can actually go online and look at the current policy map, and then just type in your area code, type your neighborhood in, and see. Like, so I did this. I did it with Clanton Park. What I found was that, okay, most of Clanton, like half of Clanton Park was designated as like neighborhood 1, which is, single family detached residential. But a large swath of the neighborhood was basically zoned for like kind of industrial or commercial development. And that's very concerning, potentially to me, because obviously there's a longstanding history of all the industrial stuff being dumped in West Charlotte, right, in the historically, working class and African-American parts of the city. But also, right, it just means basically that, a lot of the homes in the neighborhood are owned by investors. And so, if somebody decides to maybe build something that's not only out of character, but like maybe say environmentally impactful, we don't really have, they'll legally be able to do it, right? And so what you want to do is basically like pull that up and look at this map and say, hey, this needs to be redrawn such that all of this neighborhood is included as like a kind of a neighborhood 1 single family designated type neighborhood, right? So, and also too, a lot of the actual maps, for certain, have inconsistencies with what's actually there right now. And so that's why it's really important for, we've started tracking the zip codes of folks that are involved in our coalition, because it's important for people in different zip codes to actually look at the policy place type map and really see what's there for your particular zip code, right? And you may be shocked because it's like and it works because you have a sense of what's in your own neighborhood or what's in your own part of the city, right? But I was really shocked to see that. I was shocked to see that like streets that have nothing but single family residential homes, that part is designated as basically like an industrial zone, right? Like within the policy place type maps for my own neighborhood. And that's something that, like we have to kind of say, okay, like this is wrong, this needs to be changed. So the planning department is doing a whole bunch of engagements, and we'll be talking about this more. And we really have to kind of get serious input and feedback because, like I said, that's really like the landscape piece of it. And the UDO is basically what, kind of sets the rules for what can be built where. I'm trying to like break it down so it's like fairly accessible, but it's like, and also I will say too, that at this point, a lot of the stuff is still being developed. So, we might end up with some conditional rezoning processes might still be left in place, depending on what's ultimately passed. So it's, there's a lot going on right now, in addition to all the other things that are going on with the city council and the shakeups and, people who may run or not run. And, so there's a lot to pay attention to. But yes, I thank you, Dr. Sylvia, for bringing that up again. That's really important.
I think the other thing too, just to remind people, I think Kyle, you were talking about how residents in Oblivion can get involved, and in Cherry we have the Oaks at Cherry, and so you understand that a lot of this is very complicated for people. I mean, whether we're talking about it from a Comp 2040 or UDO or policy place types mapping, or even just a traditional, conventional, or conditional rezoning process, it's very complicated. And to make things even more complicated, the latest versions of these, for example, UDO and policy place types, it's not going to be available in print, right? So think about those individuals who don't have access to technology. And this whole piece of Comp 2040 is based on equity. And when you're introducing a model or a method that is inequitable, how can you expect to have equity on the end? So it really does encumber us even more so to be sure that our communities understand what this is all about. We're talking about something that's going to be around until 2040. Doesn't mean it's going to get implemented in 2040. It's getting implemented as soon as it's adopted, and it's going to be around until 2040. So if you have a whole swath of the community that has no access to technology, it really does require us even more so to be sure that communities that are disenfranchised understand what's going on here. So these kinds of things, Rocky, that you all are doing, and Greg at the library, are just essential for our communities to make sure that we are introducing some level of equity to this process.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that's key. Many of us are, have done a lot of years in school, but, looking at this UDO, the 2040, they're written well and things, but it's still a lot for just regular people to grasp their mind around. And people do care about what's going on in Charlotte. They don't want to see the mistakes of the past continue in relations to, various communities, and there's a lot of, well-meaning people, I think that, I'm not interested in like trying to think about what is inside of people's minds and such, but I think that, there's an overall like a wanting, a desire to really, do something good for the greater of Charlotte. But I think at the same time, there has to be, there has to be equity. And what we mean by that, they're just, you can't just, not anybody gets to get their cake and have it too. We have to have equity across the board. And again, there's a lot of stuff in the weeds, but it's going to have, this is one of those times where the more the community is educated, the people who are living here, that these zoning, these overlay districts, and what neighborhood 1 means versus neighborhood 2, and what are those uses by right. Again, you got to just understand, when you hear the words the developer can develop by right, that's a right? I have a right of speech. I have a right to free assembly. You have a right to develop. And if it says industry and it's in your neighborhood, they'll have a right. That's the thing. And so and so I think it's real important that asking these questions, coming there and saying, I live in Howie Acres. What do the developers, what if they come here, what will they have as a right to build that I can't say something about it because it's their right now all of a sudden. You have given them a right by this UDO. And so these are some really important, people are going to get rights. We're talking about giving people rights here. And so I think that it's a really important discussion. I hope, Greg, at the library, maybe we can revisit this topic, obviously, again, maybe before the January, I guess, completion of the first, first public inspection. I mean, there's a lot of different things that are going to have to happen. I mean, I think they said is like they probably won't get around to officially passing it, and this is just their estimate by next summer. But
right, I was gonna talk a little bit about the kind of the timeline. So there's going to be there's basically there's a community benefits task force that I think as a result of our advocacy and organizing with the CBC that the planning staff is doing currently. So that there's going to be another meeting for that in November, and basically there's going to be an implementation strategy for the overall plan, the 2040 plan that's adopted in February of 2022. That's when it's slated to be adopted. So that'll include stuff about community benefits agreements and just other aspects of the plan. And in terms of the policy mapping, I don't know. I think the initial plan was to really adapt that around maybe around the same time. The UDO likely won't be adopted until maybe spring, maybe June or July of next year. So this is fairly, there's a timeline, but we do have some time to really kind of engage with this material and really get people to, especially with the holidays and whatnot coming up. So, we do have time. It's not as if it's like all of this is sort of bearing down on us and, it's like a chicken little situation. But with that being said, it's really important that people get engaged right now. And, reach out to us, even if you don't join the coalition, we'd love to be a resource. And I did want to kind of give some sense of a timeline for these things.
It'll be interesting to see what, if anything, gets changed between the first draft and the next. I do hope there is community engagement.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to work, we're really, I mean, it's, we're not, it's not going to be if, it's just going to be how it's changed, right? I mean, we're definitely going to push for some serious changes in the draft of the UDO. And, I mean, it's, nothing's guaranteed, but we're definitely going to continue to organize and really, push the way we have been doing and engaging more and more people on the ground throughout Charlotte also.
All right. Well, I mean, now we definitely, I think, again, there's so much to this topic in many respects. And I feel like maybe today is just kind of almost like the primer, like when you're painting, kind of like that first coat of sort. And I do think that we'll revisit, the UDO maybe multiple times probably as we reach, because it's like Dr. Sylvia said, it's such there's so much just so much to understand, and it takes time to understand it and then teach it, to be able to explain it. It's not simple by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that I'll say this, kudos to everybody involved in the Housing Justice Coalition, everyone involved in the Community Benefits Coalition. Again, while I do, in my opinion, think it's one of the more underreported stories or in the city of Charlotte, but I think that this development is good. It's a community good. I think it's been long overdue. From my perspective, from being at the Community Development Clinic in Charlotte, always wondering, man, I wish these neighborhoods could get together and maybe do something, instead of being sort of isolated and sort of getting picked off one by various actors. And so I guess, in sort of a thing, thank you very much for all the work that you've all been doing. And I know that, sometimes you're in the position of, agitating for change, but I would just like to say, great work and thank you.
I mean, thank you for having us on the show. And like I said, I mean, it's not a, you know, I mean, you know, I'm in this position, but it's a position of service, you know, and then it's something that, you know, comes from a place deep inside, you know, in terms of growing up here and being a resident of Charlotte and really wishing things were different. So this is a collective process. We all have to kind of work together and really, you know, build in solidarity with one another for a future where people have power. And that's really what this is about.
And I want to say thanks to you too, Rocky, because you know, all the work that you did with Charlotte School of Law, definitely the Queen City Congress that we talked about in the past, that the Honorable Judge Shirley Fulton had helped to implement, and
My mentors right there. That's just, yeah,
exactly.
Shirley.
In many respects, what we're doing with the CBC is based on that, just a coalition of neighborhoods with common interest coming together to say, how can we best serve our collective neighborhoods to make Charlotte better? And you also connecting with Ricky Hall to talk about this. How do we take it to the next level? Having the vision for CBC. And so we appreciate you as well as being a part of the mix. We know that you are doing so many other things now, but thanks so much for the role that you played in helping to get this jump started as well.
Yeah, I'll say, you know, it's just been, and I you know, I almost feel like I'm part of the staff of the library when we're together. You know, I just feel like we really just wonder every time we get together, and we're like, man, I think this is so awesome. And just, you know, please keep doing what you're doing, because, you know, it's important work. And yeah, that's if no one else will do it, who will do it, right? You know, so thank you.
Yeah, I just want to point out this will be uploaded to YouTube early next week, so I'll pass the link on to you guys if you want to share it.
All right, everybody. Well, you know, have a great weekend. And I guess, Greg, you have an idea when we'll be back? Is it the last Friday, or are we going back to the third Friday of the month now? Or
I'll have to talk with Christy. Thanksgiving is going to be the snag next.
Oh yeah. I don't think you guys want to that'd be like the day after. Yeah, and you don't want to see what I look like the day after Just, yeah, that you know, there'll be a black screen with just my name there. You wouldn't see it. It's just, but all right, everybody. Well, you know, thank you for everything you're doing, and this is just beginning. So on behalf of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Public Library, and then Fridays with Rocky, and of course the best division in Charlotte Mecklenburg Public Library, nonprofit services, #1, numero uno. Remember that. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you.